Is there a more terrifying experience than being attacked by grizzly bears? For a 354-pound woman who sought solace and acceptance for her weight through hiking, this encounter was not just painful, but deeply traumatic. Join us as we recount the harrowing stories of wildlife enthusiasts who have survived bear attacks. Donna Mitchell defied stereotypes. At 354 pounds, she was a picture of resilience and determination, proving that physical fitness wasn't confined to any particular body shape. Her passion for hiking was born out of a desire to connect with nature, push her limits, and find solace away from the bustling world. Her latest challenge was a solo trek through Yellowstone National Park, a place renowned for its breathtaking landscapes and diverse wildlife. She had prepared meticulously for this trip. Her gear was top of the line: a sturdy backpack, high-quality hiking boots, and a GPS tracker. She carried an emergency beacon, a first aid kit, and most importantly, bear spray. Donna had read countless articles and guides on hiking in bear country, understanding the risks and how to mitigate them. She had practiced using the bear spray multiple times, ensuring she could deploy it swiftly if needed. On July 7th, 2024, the weather was perfect for her trek. The sky was clear, the air was crisp, and the trails were relatively quiet. Donna began her journey early in the morning, her spirits high as she marveled at the beauty around her. The majestic mountains, the lush forests, and the serene rivers all seemed to welcome her. She moved at her own pace, taking time to enjoy the sights and sounds of nature. The first few days of her hike were uneventful. She encountered other hikers occasionally, exchanged friendly nods, and even had brief conversations with some. Her nights were spent in designated camping areas, where she followed all the guidelines for storing food and disposing of waste to avoid attracting bears. Every evening, she would sit by her small campfire, reflecting on the day's experiences and the natural wonders she had witnessed. On the fourth day of her hike, Donna decided to venture deeper into the less-traveled parts of the park. She was drawn to the promise of untouched beauty, eager to explore areas where few had trodden. The trail became narrower and the forest denser. She crept, aware of every sound around her: the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional snap of a twig under her feet became her companions. As the afternoon sun filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the ground, Donna's attention was caught by an unusual noise. It was a low, guttural sound, followed by the rustling of bushes nearby. Her heart rate quickened, and she instinctively reached for her bear spray. She scanned her surroundings, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. Then she saw them, a mother grizzly and her two cubs, not more than 50 yards away. The mother bear's eyes locked onto Donna's. In that split second, Donna felt a surge of fear and adrenaline. She remembered the advice she had read. Remain calm. Make yourself look more extensive and slowly back away. She raised her arms, gripping the bear spray tightly, and began to retreat. However, the mother bear, sensing a threat to her cubs, had already made up her mind. With a roar that echoed through the forest, she charged. Donna's training kicked in. She aimed the bear spray and released a cloud of the potent deterrent. The bear hesitated momentarily, shaking its head, but the fury and protectiveness drove it forward, mainly because it didn't hit her well. Donna continued to back away, trying to maintain her composure, but the terrain was uneven. She stumbled and fell, the bear spray slipping from her grasp. The grizzly was upon her in seconds. Donna tried to shield herself, using her arms to protect her head and neck, but the bear's strength was overwhelming. Powerful claws tore at her clothing and flesh, and she felt the searing pain of its bites. She screamed, hoping to scare the bear off, but it was relentless, driven by an instinct to protect its young. In the chaos, Donna managed to activate her emergency beacon. The device sent a distress signal to the park rangers, who were always on high alert for such emergencies. As minutes felt like hours, Donna's world became a blur of pain and fear. She tried to stay conscious, focusing on the thought of her loved ones and the determination that had brought her here. The park rangers received the signal and sprang into action. They had a team trained for rapid response to wildlife encounters, equipped with vehicles and tranquilizers to deal with aggressive animals. The rangers raced against time, navigating the rough terrain as quickly as possible. When they arrived at the scene, the bear was still attacking Donna. The Rangers used loud noises and non-lethal rounds to drive the bear away, ensuring it would retreat without further provocation. Once the bear had disappeared into the forest, they rushed to Donna's side. She was in a critical state, with severe injuries that required immediate medical attention. A helicopter was called in for airlift, and Donna was transported to the nearest hospital. The medical team worked tirelessly to stabilize her, addressing multiple lacerations, broken bones, and significant blood loss. The first few days were touch and go, with Donna fighting for her life. Her family and friends were notified, and their worst fears were realized as they waited anxiously for updates. Donna's survival was nothing short of miraculous. Her physical condition, though unconventional for a hiker, had contributed to her endurance. She had a strong heart and an indomitable will, which played a crucial role in her recovery. The medical team was amazed by her resilience, and her story quickly spread through the park and beyond. As Donna began her long journey to recovery, the incident sparked a renewed focus on bear safety measures for park visitors. Yellowstone National Park officials reviewed their guidelines and educational programs, emphasizing the importance of caution and preparation when hiking in bear country. They introduced more comprehensive training sessions, ensuring that all visitors understood the risks and knew how to use bear spray effectively. The park also increased the number of rangers on patrol, especially in areas known for high bear activity. They worked on developing better tracking systems for wildlife, aiming to provide hikers with real-time updates about bear movements. The incident with Donna Mitchell became a case study, a powerful reminder of the unpredictable nature of wildlife and the importance of respecting their habitats. Johan Lane, a seasoned backpacker with an unyielding love for the great outdoors, had long dreamed of traversing the vast, unspoiled forests of Finland. Johan, a native Finn with a sturdy frame and a rugged disposition, relished these opportunities to disconnect from the modern world and reconnect with nature's raw beauty. Having spent countless hours preparing for his journey, Johan meticulously planned every aspect of his trip. He pored over maps, studied weather patterns, and honed his survival skills. He knew the risks. The forest could be both a sanctuary and a perilous expanse. Armed with a well-stocked backpack, a reliable tent, and an assortment of survival gear, he felt ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. On the third day of his journey, Johan's path led him to a remote lake, its waters a mirror reflecting the sky and surrounding trees. It was an idyllic spot, far from any signs of civilization. As evening approached, he decided this would be his campsite for the night. He pitched his tent near the shoreline, the soft lapping of water providing a soothing backdrop. He gathered firewood, arranged it into a neat pile, and set about preparing his meal. The smell of cooking meat and vegetables soon filled the air, mingling with the earthy scent of the forest. Johan finished his meal and tidied up his campsite, carefully packing away his food supplies in a bear-proof container and stowing it a safe distance from his tent. He knew the importance of proper food storage in bear country, a lesson ingrained in him through years of outdoor experience. Satisfied with his precautions, he settled into his tent, the warmth of his sleeping bag cocooning him against the cool night air. Just as he began to drift into sleep, a faint rustling outside jolted him awake. His heart quickened as he lay still, ears straining to identify the source. The sound grew louder, closer, and unmistakably deliberate. Without warning, a massive shape emerged from the shadows, charging towards his camp with a ferocity that left no time for hesitation. Johan's body reacted instinctively, adrenaline surging through his veins as he scrambled out of his tent. The bear, drawn by the lingering scent of his dinner, was upon him in an instant. Its sheer size and power were overwhelming, a force of nature that could not be reasoned with. Johan barely had time to register the pain as the bear's claws raked across his back, tearing through clothing and flesh. He stumbled, trying to put distance between himself and the beast, but the bear was relentless. A powerful swipe to his leg sent him sprawling, the world spinning as he fought to maintain consciousness. Bloodied and battered, he knew that his survival hinged on his ability to think clearly and act decisively. Johan forced himself to focus. The bear was temporarily distracted by the remnants of his campfire, and that curiosity provided a brief window of opportunity. He seized a burning branch, the makeshift torch flickering with the promise of life. Summoning every ounce of strength, he thrust the flame toward the bear, the heat and light startling it momentarily. The bear recoiled, giving Johann precious seconds to act. Ignoring the searing pain that coursed through his body, Johann pushed himself to his feet and limped towards the lake. He knew he couldn't outrun the bear, but water might offer some protection. The bear hesitated. Its primal instincts conflicted with the unfamiliar threat of fire and water. Johann plunged into the frigid lake. The cold was a shock to his system, but a necessary discomfort. The bear paced the shoreline, its frustration evident. Johann held the torch high, its light reflecting off the water's surface. Minutes felt like hours as he waited, his breath ragged and his wounds throbbing. Eventually, the bear lost interest, retreating into the darkness from which it came. Only then did Johann allow himself a moment of relief, his body trembling from the cold and the adrenaline crash. He knew he couldn't stay in the lake indefinitely. The ranger station, a beacon of safety and aid, was several kilometers away. He had marked it on his map earlier, a precautionary note that now proved invaluable. Summoning his remaining strength, he waded to the shore and began the arduous trek, each step a battle against pain and fatigue. Hours later, as dawn's first light began to pierce the canopy, Johann spotted the ranger station. It stood like a sentinel in the wilderness, a humble structure that represented hope and salvation. His vision blurred, his steps faltering, but he pressed on, fueled by the promise of rescue. He stumbled through the door, collapsing on the floor, his voice barely a whisper as he called for help. The Rangers acted swiftly, their training and expertise turning chaos into order. They assessed his injuries, staunching the bleeding and administering first aid. Johann drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain receding into a dull throb as shock set in. He felt the jolt of the emergency vehicle, the distant wail of a siren, and the sterile comfort of a hospital room. Weeks later, Johann lay in a hospital bed, his body a testament to the brutal encounter. His back bore the scars of the bear's claws, his legs stitched together with the precision of modern medicine. The journey to recovery was long, but he faced it with the same resilience that had carried him through the forest. He knew he had been lucky, and his survival was a combination of training, instinct, and sheer will. Jane Waters always had a profound connection with nature, an affinity that led her to become one of the most renowned wildlife photographers of her generation. Her life was a montage of adventures and expeditions, each trip bringing her closer to the raw beauty of the natural world. Tasmania had always been on her list, a remote wilderness teeming with unique fauna, some of which couldn't be found anywhere else on the planet. Jane had meticulously planned her trip. She wanted to capture the island's elusive creatures, the ones that had rarely been seen through a camera lens. Her itinerary included the rugged terrains of the Tasmanian wilderness, the lush temperate rainforests, and the open plains that stretched into the horizon. Her excitement was palpable as she boarded the small aircraft that would take her from mainland Australia to Tasmania. The island was everything she had imagined and more. The forests were thick with ancient trees, their canopies creating a mosaic of shadows and light on the forest floor. Jane's base camp was set up in a remote area near the Tarkine rainforest, one of the most biodiverse regions in Tasmania. From here, she ventured into the wilderness each day, her camera always at the ready. Her days were filled with moments of awe and wonder as she captured the island's unique wildlife. She photographed the swift and elusive Tasmanian devils, their fiery eyes glinting in the twilight. It was during one of these quiet mornings, as Jane lay hidden among the underbrush, that the serenity of the forest was shattered. She was entirely focused on a wombat family, adjusting her lens to capture the playful antics of the young ones, when a sudden rustling sound caught her attention. She glanced up, her heart skipping a beat as she saw a large shadow moving through the trees. It was a bear, a creature not native to Tasmania and certainly out of its usual territory. Jane's mind raced. How had it ended up here? The bear was agitated, its movements erratic as it wandered through the unfamiliar terrain. Jane's instincts kicked in. She knew that bears could be unpredictable, especially when startled. She remained as still as possible, hoping the bear would pass without noticing her. But fate was not on her side that day. A sudden breeze carried her scent towards the bear, and it turned its head sharply in her direction. Their eyes met, and in that instant Jane knew she was in grave danger. The bear, sensing an intruder in its already confusing environment, reacted defensively. It charged towards her, a terrifying sight that sent a jolt of adrenaline through her body. Jane's mind raced, her training and experience battling with the sheer terror of the moment. She grabbed her camera, the heaviest piece of equipment she had, and held it out in front of her, hoping to use it as a shield. The bear was upon her in seconds, its massive paws swiping at her with a force that knocked her off her feet. Jane felt a searing pain as the bear's claws raked across her body, but she fought to stay conscious. She used her camera to fend off the bear as best as she could. Each swipe of its claws met with a desperate block. Her body screamed in agony, but she knew she couldn't give up. Her survival instincts took over, and every movement was a testament to her will to live. In the midst of the chaos, Jane remembered the emergency flare she carried in her backpack. It was her last resort, a signal for help that she hoped would reach someone in this remote wilderness. With trembling hands, she fumbled for the flare, pulling it from her pack and igniting it. The bright light and sudden burst of smoke startled the bear, causing it to pause its attack momentarily. The flare's light cut through the forest, a beacon of distress that could be seen from miles away. As the bear hesitated, Jane prayed that someone would see her signal. Her body was weakening, the pain threatening to overwhelm her, but she couldn't give up now. The bear, confused and agitated, roared in frustration, but the flare had done its job. The bright light and smoke had brought her precious moments. Miles away, a group of hikers was making their way through the forest. They had been exploring the Tasmanian wilderness, drawn by the promise of adventure and the island's natural beauty. One of the hikers, a seasoned mountaineer named Tom, spotted the flare. He knew it was a distress signal and immediately alerted his companions. Without hesitation, they changed their course, making their way towards the source of the flare as quickly as possible. Jane's vision was beginning to blur, her body succumbing to the pain and blood loss. She clung to consciousness, willing herself to stay awake. The sound of footsteps reached her ears, growing louder as the hiking group approached. When they burst through the underbrush and saw the scene before them, they wasted no time. Tom and another hiker, a former paramedic, rushed to Jane's side while the others worked to scare off the bear. Tom used his hiking poles and loud shouts to intimidate the bear, making himself appear larger and more threatening. The bear, already disoriented by the flare, backed away, growling in frustration before finally retreating into the forest. With the immediate danger gone, the hikers turned their full attention to Jane. The former paramedic assessed her injuries quickly, recognizing the severity of her condition. They needed to get her to a hospital fast. They fashioned a makeshift stretcher from their gear, carefully lifting Jane onto it. The hike back to their base camp was grueling, every step filled with urgency and fear for Jane's life. At the base camp, they had a satellite phone, their lifeline to the outside world. They called for emergency medical assistance, providing their coordinates and details of the attack. An air ambulance was dispatched, cutting through the skies towards their location. As they waited, the hikers did everything they could to keep Jane stable, talking to her, holding her conscious, and administering first aid. The medical team arrived swiftly, taking over from the hikers and providing advanced care. Jane was airlifted to the nearest hospital, her journey a blur of pain and fleeting moments of clarity. In the hospital, Jane underwent several surgeries to treat her injuries. The doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, and their expertise and dedication gave her the best chance at recovery. Jane's will to survive, the same determination that had driven her to explore the wilds of Tasmania, saw her through the darkest hours. Her recovery was long and arduous, filled with physical therapy and moments of doubt, but she never lost her resolve. David Ross had been planning his trip to the Italian Alps for over a year. He had meticulously researched the best trails, the most breathtaking viewpoints, and the hidden gems known only to locals. This trip was meant to be a retreat from the pressures of his high-powered job in New York City, a chance to immerse himself in nature and rejuvenate his spirit. The Italian Alps, with their majestic peaks and serene valleys, offered the perfect escape. David had always loved the mountains, having spent his childhood summers hiking with his family in the Rockies. As he arrived in the quaint village of Cortina d'Ampezzo, he felt a wave of nostalgia and excitement wash over him. The town, nestled in a picturesque valley, was a blend of charming old-world architecture and modern amenities, catering to tourists from around the globe. David spent his first few days acclimating to the altitude and exploring the village. He visited the local markets, sampled traditional Italian cuisine, and chatted with the friendly locals. Everywhere he went, he marveled at the stunning backdrop of the Dolomite Mountains, their jagged peaks rising dramatically against the clear blue sky. He couldn't wait to explore them up close. On the morning of his third day, David set out early to tackle one of the more popular hiking trails, known for its panoramic views and challenging terrain. He packed his backpack with essentials, water, snacks, a first aid kit, and his camera, eager to capture the beauty of the landscape. The trailhead was just a short walk from his hotel, and as he began his ascent, he felt a surge of energy and anticipation. The trail wound through dense forests and across open meadows, each turn revealing a new vista more breathtaking than the last. David took his time, stopping frequently to photograph wildflowers, cascading streams, and the distant snow-capped peaks. Around midday, David reached a particularly scenic spot, a rocky outcrop that offered an unobstructed view of the valley below and the surrounding peaks. He decided to take a break and have lunch, sitting on a flat rock with his legs dangling over the edge. He munched on a sandwich and sipped water, his gaze wandering across the vast, undulating landscape. The air was crisp and cool, and the sun was pleasantly warm on his skin. After finishing his meal, David pulled out his camera again, eager to capture the stunning panorama. He stood up, adjusted the settings, and began framing his shot. Lost in the act of composition, he didn't notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't until he heard a faint rustling behind him that he turned around. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just the familiar trees and underbrush. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he caught a movement. A massive, dark shape emerged from the foliage, moving with a quiet, purposeful gait. David's heart skipped a beat as he realized what it was. A bear, a large brown bear, and it was heading in his direction. He froze, his mind racing. He had read about bear encounters in his hiking guides, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of facing one in the wild. He knew he should remain calm, avoid making sudden movements, and slowly back away. But fear had a tight grip on him, and his instincts screamed for him to run. The bear paused, sniffing the air, its tiny eyes locking onto David. For a moment, they stood there, man and beast, in a tense standoff. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the bear charged. David turned and ran, his heart pounding, adrenaline surging through his veins. He could hear the heavy thuds of the bear's paws on the ground behind him, growing louder and closer. Despite his best efforts, David stumbled on the uneven terrain, his foot catching on a loose rock. He fell hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Before he could scramble to his feet, the bear was upon him. Pain exploded in his side as the bear's claws raked across his body, and he screamed, a raw, primal sound of terror and agony. Nearby, hikers heard his cries and rushed toward the source of the noise. They arrived at a horrific scene. David was bloodied and barely conscious, with the bear standing over him. Acting quickly, they used their trekking poles and whistles to create a loud, chaotic commotion. The bear, startled and confused by the sudden onslaught of noise and movement, retreated into the forest. The hikers immediately set to work, administering first aid to David while one of them called for emergency assistance. They tried to keep him conscious, talking to him, reassuring him that help was on the way. The minutes stretched into an eternity as they waited for the rescue team, their faces etched with concern. When the helicopter finally arrived, it felt like a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. Paramedics swiftly secured David onto a stretcher and airlifted him to the nearest hospital. His injuries were severe, deep lacerations, a fractured rib, and significant blood loss. He was rushed into surgery, and the medical team worked tirelessly to stabilize him. David drifted in and out of consciousness over the next several days. He was dimly aware of the beeping machines, the hushed voices of the doctors and nurses, the antiseptic smell of the hospital. His body ached, each breath a painful reminder of his ordeal. But he was alive, and for that, he was profoundly grateful. As he began to recover, David learned more about the extent of his injuries and the surgeries he had undergone. The doctors had repaired the damage as best they could, but his recovery would be long and arduous. Physical therapy, follow-up surgeries, and a lengthy rehabilitation process awaited him. The incident had a ripple effect far beyond David's ordeal. News of the bear attack spread quickly, making headlines and raising alarm among locals and tourists alike. The Italian authorities launched an investigation, seeking to understand what had led to the bear's aggressive behavior. They also reviewed existing safety protocols for hikers, recognizing the need for more stringent measures to prevent such incidents in the future. Dr. Emily Harris was a dedicated biologist whose passion for understanding the natural world led her to focus her research on bear behavior and habitat. The Canadian Rockies, with their vast expanse of untouched wilderness, offered a perfect setting for her studies. For months, Emily had been living in a small cabin near the base of the mountains, venturing out daily to collect data and observe the local bear population. Her days were long and filled with meticulous note-taking, setting up camera traps and tracking bear movements through the dense forest. Emily was well versed in the habits and behaviors of these majestic creatures. She had spent years studying them, learning to respect their space and understand their signals. On a warm afternoon in late summer, Emily set out with her backpack loaded with equipment. Her destination was a meadow she had recently discovered, a prime spot where bears often foraged for food. The meadow was nestled in a valley surrounded by towering peaks, a hidden gem that provided ample food sources for the bears. Emily had already set up several camera traps in the area and was eager to check the footage. As she approached the meadow, she moved quietly, her eyes scanning for any signs of recent bear activity. As she moved further into the meadow, she came across a patch of disturbed earth. The soil was freshly turned, and there were clear signs of digging. Emily knelt to inspect the area, noting the size and depth of the holes. Bears often dug for roots and insects, and this spot is a recent feeding site. She pulled out her field notebook and began to document her findings, her mind focused on the task at hand. Suddenly, a sound caught her attention, a low, rumbling growl. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She slowly turned her head, scanning the area for the source of the noise. About 50 yards away, partially hidden by the underbrush, she saw a large bear. It was a magnificent animal. Its fur was rich brown, and its eyes were dark and intense. The bear was clearly agitated, its body tense and its gaze fixed on her. Emily's extensive knowledge of bear behavior flooded her mind. She knew that the bear was likely foraging for food and had perceived her presence as a threat. Her training had taught her to remain calm and avoid sudden movements, so she slowly began to back away, maintaining eye contact with the bear. She hoped that by giving the bear space, it would lose interest and move on. However, the bear did not retreat. Instead, it took a step forward, its growl growing louder and more menacing. Emily's heart raced as she realized that the situation was escalating. She continued to back away, her mind racing through the options. She had bear spray in her backpack, but it was out of reach, and she knew that any sudden movements could provoke the bear further. The bear's posture shifted, its body lowering as it prepared to charge. Emily's instincts kicked in, and she turned to run. She sprinted through the meadow, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she pushed herself to move faster. Behind her, she heard the thunderous sound of the bear crashing through the underbrush, its powerful body gaining on her. Emily's mind was a blur of fear and determination. She knew that reaching her research vehicle was her only chance of survival. The terrain was rough and she stumbled several times, but she forced herself to keep going. Her legs burned with the effort, and her lungs screamed for air, but she couldn't stop. The sound of the bear's pursuit was a constant, terrifying presence. As she neared the edge of the meadow, Emily felt a searing pain in her leg. The bear had caught up to her, its massive paw striking her with incredible force. She fell to the ground, the impact knocking the wind out of her. Desperation surged through her as she struggled to get up. The bear was upon her, its mighty jaws snapping dangerously close to her face. Emily used every ounce of strength she had to fight back. She kicked and flailed, trying to protect her vital areas. The bear's claws raked across her body, tearing through her clothes and skin. The pain was excruciating, but she couldn't afford to give in to it. She reached for her backpack, managing to grab the bear spray. With a trembling hand, she aimed it at the bear and released a burst of the repellent. The bear recoiled, momentarily disoriented by the spray. Emily seized the opportunity to scramble to her feet and continue her desperate run. Blood streamed from her wounds, and every step sent waves of agony through her body. She could see her research vehicle in the distance, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. The vehicle was parked at the edge of the forest, just a few hundred yards away. Emily's vision blurred with pain and exhaustion, but she forced herself to keep moving. The bear, still dazed by the spray, was slower to resume its chase, giving her a precious few seconds to widen the gap. Reaching the vehicle, Emily fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She managed to unlock the door and collapsed into the driver's seat. She slammed the door shut just as the bear reached the vehicle, its massive body colliding with the side. With the bear still clawing at the vehicle, Emily floored the accelerator. The tires spun on the loose gravel before gaining traction, and the car surged forward. She drove as fast as she could, her vision narrowing to the road ahead. The bear gave chase for a short distance before eventually giving up and disappearing into the forest. Emily didn't stop driving until she reached the nearest ranger station. Her body was a patchwork of wounds, her clothes soaked with blood. She honked the horn repeatedly, collapsing against the steering wheel as the rangers rushed out to help her. They quickly assessed her injuries and called for an emergency medical evacuation. As Emily was airlifted to the nearest hospital, her mind drifted in and out of consciousness. The pain was overwhelming, but she felt a deep sense of gratitude for having survived. Her encounter with the bear was a reminder of the dangers faced by wildlife researchers, even those with extensive knowledge and experience. The story of Emily's attack spread quickly, drawing attention to the risks inherent in field research. Her colleagues and fellow researchers rallied around her, advocating for improved safety measures and training for those working in close proximity to wildlife. The Ivanov family, consisting of Sergei, his wife Olga, and their 3 children, Anna, Nikolai, and the youngest, Alexei, set out on a summer camping trip in the Urals. It was meant to be a much-needed escape from the hustle and bustle of their urban life in Moscow. Sergei, a stoic man with a rugged demeanor, had always dreamt of sharing the beauty of nature with his family. He envisioned days filled with hiking, fishing, and evenings gathered around a campfire under the star-studded sky. The journey to the Urals was long but filled with excitement. As they drove through the vast expanse of Russian countryside, the children marveled at the changing landscapes. From the dense forest to the rolling hills and finally, to the majestic mountain range of the Urals, the scenery was a breathtaking prelude to their adventure. They arrived at the campsite in the early afternoon. Sergei's chosen location was perfect, secluded yet not too far from a small village where they could get supplies if needed. The site was nestled beside a serene lake surrounded by towering pine trees that whispered secrets to the wind. Setting up camp was a family affair. The tent was pitched on a flat patch of grass, and a makeshift kitchen area was established near the campfire pit. Sergei and Nikolai gathered firewood while Anna and Olga organized the supplies. Little Alexei, a curious and energetic 5-year-old, busied himself collecting colorful pebbles by the lakeshore. The first few days were idyllic. They spent their mornings hiking the trails that wound through the forest, afternoons swimming in the calm, clear lake, and evenings fishing. Sergei taught Nikolai how to cast a fishing line while Olga and Anna prepared meals with the fresh fish they caught. Alexei, with his boundless energy, darted around, chasing butterflies and exploring the undergrowth. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sergei decided to treat the family to a particular barbecue. The aroma of marinated meat grilling over the fire wafted through the air, mingling with the scent of pine and wildflowers. It was a perfect moment, the kind that Sergei had envisioned when planning the trip. As dusk settled in, the family gathered around the campfire to enjoy their meal. The crackling fire cast a warm glow, and the sounds of laughter filled the air. Sergei felt a deep sense of contentment, watching his family enjoy the simple pleasures of life. They stayed by the fire until the stars emerged, bright and countless against the velvet sky. Unbeknownst to the Ivanovs, the scent of their barbecue had attracted an unwanted visitor. Deep in the forest, a bear caught the tantalizing aroma. Driven by hunger and curiosity, the bear began to make its way toward the campsite. The dense foliage and twilight shadows concealed its approach, making the animal nearly invisible. The first sign of danger came as a rustling in the bushes. Sergei, ever vigilant, noticed the movement and felt a prickle of unease. He dismissed it as a small animal, perhaps a fox or a raccoon. But the rustling grew louder and more pronounced, and the shadows seemed to move with purpose. The bear emerged from the forest, a hulking mass of fur and muscle. Its eyes gleamed with hunger and its robust frame moved with surprising stealth. The family, engrossed in their activities, didn't notice the predator until it was too late. The bear lunged into the campsite with a terrifying roar. Chaos erupted as the family scrambled in different directions. Olga and Anna grabbed Nikolai and Alexei, pulling them toward the vehicle parked a short distance away. Sergei, realizing the immediate danger to his family, grabbed the camping axe he had used earlier to chop firewood. The bear, driven by hunger and the irresistible scent of food, charged at the youngest member of the family. Alexei, frozen in fear, was directly in its path. Sergei's heart pounded as he hurled himself between the bear and his son. With a mighty swing, he brought the axe down on the bear's shoulder, aiming to drive it away. The blow momentarily stunned the bear, but it quickly recovered, its fury now directed at Sergei. It swiped at him with a massive paw, the claws tearing through his jacket and into his flesh. Sergei felt a searing pain but stood his ground, swinging the axe again and again, trying to keep the bear at bay. Olga and the children reached the vehicle and frantically climbed inside. She turned to see her husband, bloodied and struggling, fighting for their lives. Her mind raced, knowing she had to protect her children but also wanting to help Sergei. The vehicle's horn blared as she leaned on it, hoping to scare the bear away or attract help. Sergei fought with every ounce of his strength, his vision blurring from pain and exertion. The bear's sheer power was overwhelming, and Sergei knew he couldn't hold out much longer. He swung the axe in wide arcs, each strike driven by a desperate will to survive and protect his family. The bear, though injured and bleeding, continued its assault. Sergei was knocked to the ground, the axe slipping from his grasp. He kicked and punched, his movements growing weaker. Just as the bear reared back for another strike, the sound of the vehicle's horn and the sight of approaching headlights from a nearby camper spooked it. The bear hesitated, growled one last time, and then retreated into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. Olga rushed to Sergei's side, her hands trembling as she assessed his injuries. He was severely wounded, with deep gashes and bruises covering his body. Despite his condition, Sergei managed a weak smile, relieved that his family was safe. Help arrived shortly after, with fellow campers who had heard the commotion. They quickly provided first aid and helped Olga get Sergei into the vehicle. The nearest hospital was hours away, and every minute counted. Olga drove through the winding forest roads with fierce determination, her mind focused solely on saving her husband. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. Olga kept glancing at Sergei, his breathing labored and his face pale. The children huddled in the back seat were silent, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. The reality of the attack had left them shaken, their innocent view of the world forever altered. They reached the hospital and Sergei was rushed into surgery. Olga and the children waited in the sterile waiting room, the tension palpable. Hours passed, each one feeling more extended than the last. Finally, a doctor emerged, his expression grave but hopeful. Sergei had survived the surgery, but his recovery would be long and arduous. The Ivanov family stayed in a nearby motel during Sergei's initial recovery. The ordeal had left them physically and emotionally scarred, but he reassured them with his presence, his determination to recover evident in every painful movement.